it's my great pleasure to announce our first speaker, Ambassador Amy Hyatt. And I can tell you, she's very, very impressive. It was wonderful being able to have an opportunity to speak with her. She's been with the Foreign Service for about 32 years. Obviously, a graduate of BU, got her JD from Stanford and a master's from the National War College in strategic planning or something along those lines. And the more I get to chat with her, she's very humble, I find interesting things. She was involved as one of a handful of people in negotiating with North Korea on nuclear arms and nuclear proliferation. And so that's just one of the many things that she's been involved with. Her postings read like a list of interesting locations to live and work: Korea, the Czech Republic, Norway, Finland, Australia, Egypt, and soon she'll talk about Palau and her work there. More than anything else, she brings really a wealth of experience and a unique perspective to climate change. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Ambassador Amy Hyatt tell her story. Amy?
Thank you, James. It's such a privilege to be back here in Binghamton. It's so wonderful to be in the environment that inspired me to do what I wanted to do with my life, with the professors and the institution and the administration and everything that Binghamton has. I'm really grateful for the background that I got, for the lifelong friends that I made, and for the opportunity to study among such wonderful people. I'm here with some pretty impressive people who do this sort of stuff, environmentally related, for a living. That's not what I do. I'm a career diplomat. So as James said, I travel around the world and change every few years to different countries, focused on different issues. It's been my tremendous honor and privilege to represent our country in all of these different environments, and I'm very grateful. And I'm grateful to be here now to talk to you. We're going to talk different aspects of this challenge, of this issue related to climate change and environmental and global warming. As I said, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an environmentalist, but it's a part of what I do as an American diplomat overseas. You're going to hear someone who knows a lot about policy and policy making. You're going to hear from someone who knows a lot about communication and awareness of climate change issues. I guess I would say that my talk is more like the punch in the gut, so buckle up. I have the good fortune of living in Palau. I'm the U.S. ambassador to Palau, and there's a picture of what it looks like. It's gorgeous. I suspect that virtually nobody in the room knows where Palau is, so let me just take a moment to tell you. It's a small island nation in the Western Pacific. Tiny population, beautiful land mass. It's further west than Hawaii by about 10 hours as the crow flies. It's also near Guam, near the Philippines, way out there. It was a site of one of the bloodiest battles in World War II, Peleliu, if any of you have ever heard of that. That's also in Palau. It's a beautiful place. It's a pristine paradise. However, like many of the island nations in the Pacific, it's vulnerable. And that, for an islander, is the scariest word, I'm told, vulnerable, and they very much are. As a tiny island nation in the Pacific, the Palauans view themselves as not a small island nation, but a large ocean state. And from their perspective, the ocean does not separate us from each other. The ocean connects us. And so what happens on one end of the ocean continues and affects the other parts of the ocean. So these are various scenes from Palau. And what I want to say about these small island nations, including Palau, is they are the smallest contributors to whatever's causing climate change. They are not the ones that are causing the problems. However, they are suffering the most deeply from the consequences of what the rest of the world is creating. When we talk and debate about does climate change exist and what are the causes and is it natural, that's a nice academic debate. For these island nations, it's an existential issue. It involves their survival. So for them, it's what they're most interested in. So what are the consequences for small island nations of climate change, global warming, and this effect? Well, for one thing, there's a rising ocean. As the ice caps melt and as the ocean rises, for countries like the United States and other places that are landlocked, oh, that's an interesting talking point. For small island nations, it means whether or not they will have any land left. In fact, there's one country in the Pacific, not far from Palau, called Kiribati. And Kiribati is watching as their country is disappearing as the ocean is rising. And so what their government has chosen to do is to buy land in another country. So when the day comes, their entire population will have to move away from Kiribati to another location. How sad is that, that that's their reality? Climate change and the effect of the warming ocean has a big effect on arable land where farming can go on, a big effect on potable water. As the ocean is taking over the land, there's less land that can be farmed, less water that can be drunk. This has survival implications for these small nations. It's doing damage. The heating of our planet is doing damage to our coral reefs. Now you could say, well, it's nice to snorkel around the reefs, but who really cares? I'll tell you why you should care. Because as coral reefs are dying, and there are locations where they're all but dead, coral reefs are the engine of production of food for marine life, for the fish that we eat. We lose our coral reefs, we lose our food. We lose our food sources, especially for these island nations that rely so heavily on fish. It also affects storms. The storms are not only becoming more in number, they're becoming greater in intensity, and they are causing enormous impact. And they're going places where they never went before. Palau used to be a country that was rarely affected by typhoons. They may have been generated near Palau's waters, but they went elsewhere. And the president of Palau said in a speech he recently gave, we used to pray for the survivors of the storms that were born in Palau but went elsewhere. Now we're praying for ourselves because the storms are hitting us as well. And droughts, terrible droughts are hitting these island nations, and the droughts are causing all kinds of problems. They can't truck in water from another state. They are without resources if the drought is getting worse and worse. And they've had epic droughts, too, in just the last 3.5 years. So what can we do about it? Well, some of the things that we as the US government are doing are trying to build resilience, let me just say that if all of the Pacific Island nations reduce their carbon footprint to zero, it would have zero impact on the change in the oceans and change in the climate. They don't have enough of an impact. So they can't make a difference. So what we, the US government, are doing, what we are doing in the countries of the Pacific and other vulnerable locations, what we are doing is trying to help them become more resilient, prepare for the disasters, not if they come, when they come. And so there are different ways that we're doing that. And one way is we're trying to help them turn their back on some of the Western ways that have been introduced, such as some of the food products you see here, and to try to turn them back to some of the more traditional ways that they cultivated the land. One of the things that they use is taro. They grow taro, which is a wonderful food product, a lot of nutrients, great for their health, but a lot of work. And so it was easier to just buy imported unhealthy foods. But we are encouraging them to reclaim the land where they farmed taro. Because taro, the plants themselves, have an environmental impact. They hold back the water. They hold back the soil while they're feeding the population. So paying money and contributing and helping Palau reclaim some of these old taro patches is just good all around. It's just island turning back to its own culture to save themselves and prepare for food security for the challenges that are coming their way. Helping them also embrace certain scientific advancements that can affect the way they raise livestock, the way they do other things that can contribute to a healthier and more secure food source. Another way is through awareness. By helping Palauans and young Palauans understand how the island is such an important ecosystem. And one of the things I want to point to is the mangrove tree. The mangrove tree grows right on the ocean, and you can see it's a pretty weird looking tree with those big root structures. But there's a point, there's a reason why the islands are filled with mangrove. And as hotels are being built on the beaches, as homes are being built on the beaches, these mango trees are being cut down. And the problem with that is that the mango trees are there to hold back the ocean and keep the soil where it belongs. If you cut them down, the soil runs into the ocean, it kills the the coral reefs, and it destroys the farmable, arable land for food security. So there's a reason that islands are surrounded by interesting, crazy-looking trees like the mangrove, and we're helping to raise awareness how important it is to maintain that ecosystem. How else are we helping to prepare Palau for the dangers that are coming? Through better weather forecasting. So the United States government is building weather stations and improving weather stations that exist throughout the Pacific. The U.S. Weather Service built recently a brand new weather station in Palau. I was there cutting the ribbon for it. And it's designed to give Palau in their hands the ability to watch and forecast and predict and warn their population when storms are coming and whether they're predicted to hit them harder than they might otherwise, so they can prepare. But in addition, they're also part of this chain of islands that are able to forecast and predict the routes of storms. So even the ones headed toward the United States, they're part of a group that will help us predict how the storms are going to hit the United States. So we also work on changing hearts and minds at a younger level, teaching the young people why it matters, why environmental issues are important, why it's important to their survival, and what they can do individually, take responsibility, including improving their diet so that they don't rely on these Western unhealthy imported foods, but rather grow and help contribute to the ones that'll keep them healthy and keep their land healthy. And I want to speak a little bit about something that Palau is doing itself, and that is sustainable tourism. Palau is a mecca for tourists. It's a scuba diving heaven, and therefore lots of tourists come to Palau to see what's beautiful there, to enjoy the amazing marine life, things you wouldn't see anywhere else. But the problem is tourists are not evil, but they are not necessarily aware of how their impact can actually destroy what they're going there to see. So Palau has started this program of the Palau Pledge. And the Palau Pledge is every visitor to Palau gets a stamp in their passport that they have to sign in front of the immigration officer. And that pledge in their passport says, "To the children of Palau, I promise to be careful with the way I utilize and enjoy your beautiful country, to be careful not to harm the wildlife, to be careful not to do damage, to leave only footprints and take only photographs, to make a difference." And so people all over the world have been asked to sign the Palau Pledge in addition, including Prince Charles and Secretary Kerry and lots of other people have been asked to sign, Leonardo DiCaprio, just to highlight the importance of this effort. And I think this is going to move to other island nations, too, that are equally under threat of tourists doing what tourists do. Another way that we're helping with countries like Palau to become more resilient is through building typhoon shelters and strengthening typhoon shelters to be able to withstand these greater storms that are hitting, so that when they hit, we know the homes are never going to be able to withstand it, but the hope is that the population will survive. So they will have a place to go when before the storm hits, so they can survive and then live to rebuild their homes and their schools. I also want to speak just a moment about the Green Climate Fund, which is something that the United Nations, through the United Nations, was established to take money from the larger developed nations, like the United States, to create a fund of $10 billion that can be used to help make the smaller, more vulnerable, less developed nations more resilient to the changes and the effects of climate change. So the United States contributed $1 billion of the $10 billion goal for the Green Climate Fund. And what we've been doing in small island nations and helping them to access that fund, because it's not so easy to just say, give me this for that. They need to be able to develop projects and plans and grant requests that will be acceptable to the Green Climate Fund. So in different ways, we are training Palau to be able to access those important funds. I also want to mention that Palau has actively engaged in an effort to try to protect the marine life. They've created a marine sanctuary. So 80% of their ocean area around the country is no longer open for commercial fisheries. And the reason they do that is because they want to allow the fish stocks to repopulate and to have the fish be safe there so that they can go all over the world, including to the United States, and increase the fish population, because many fish species are overfished and are threatened and with extinction. So this is something that traditionally Palau did anyway, its traditional leaders, but now it's become the government as well. So we assist them through the U.S. Navy and also the U.S. Coast Guard, helping them to enforce their marine sanctuary. And I want to end my talk with just reading a poem to you. I have copies of this poem over on either side if anyone's interested. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but it was written by a young islander, young island woman, not a Palauan, but a neighboring nation of Marshall Islands. And the poem speaks a lot about what's wonderful about their country. And the title of the poem is Tell Them. So the goal in the poem is to tell the world about her country and why it matters. And so a lot of it is just, this is where we do this, this is our culture, this is this. But the ending is where she ties it into climate. And she talks about, tell them about the water, how we have seen it rising, flooding across our cemeteries, gushing over the seawalls, and crashing against our homes. Tell them what it's like to see the entire ocean level with the land. Tell them we are afraid. Tell them we don't know the politics or the science, but tell them we see what is in our own backyard. Tell them that some of us, some of the old fishermen who believe that God made them a promise, some of us are a bit more skeptical of that. But most importantly, tell them we don't want to leave. We've never wanted to leave, and that we are nothing without our islands. So now I have told you. Thank you.